Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Alex. I will be the moderator. I want to just welcome Tracy. We are in AI and finance today. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, come off mute, raise your hands. Tracy is very comfortable with answering things in the heat of the moment. So please feel free. And if you need anything else, you let me know. And Tracy, when you're ready, we can take it away.
Alex, for a couple minutes getting started a little bit late today, but that's all right. I want to welcome everyone to our series. We're going to be talking today about forecasting. We actually had talked about that. I had talked about this roughly 6 months ago, and today we're going to dig a little bit deeper and we're going to really talk about forecasting as it relates to Q1, but also just forecasting in general and what it is, common misconceptions, how AI can help our companies with this, and then some tools that you can use in AI for forecasting. So for those of you that don't know me, because I see several of you that I do not know yet, welcome. My name's Tracy Anamalu, and my background is in financial services. I'm here in New York City, and I've also worked overseas as well, primarily in risk management, compliance, governance, all those things that we're talking about today that are really pertinent around AI implementation. So when I run these sessions, the idea is that we're always going to have that in the back recesses of our mind, and how we can responsibly implement AI for our clients. And I wanted to mention too, before I got started, I think Alex had said this, but perhaps not. Anyone jump in whenever you want. I really like this to be a very cohesive and engaging conversation, and not just me carrying on for the next 45 minutes. So either raise your hand or feel free to jump in. We will have a Q&A at the end. But like I said, I like to keep things moving and have anyone jump in. So with that, we will get started. And I wanted to mention just a few things to keep in mind before we start all of this. For many of you, this will be a review. For many of you, this will be something that doesn't entirely apply to your clients. We all are working in different industries and different sized industries. So, just a couple things that I want to highlight as I'm going through for you to bear in mind. Forecasting looks different for every SMB. Not all clients are at the same revenue level, obviously. They're not using the same tools, and they're financially may or may not be financially mature. So the takeaway from that is that there's no perfect forecasting as such for clients, but you're teaching them appropriate forecasting for where their business is today. So again, I just mentioned this because some of this you may or may not find applicable to your own clients. And then the other is something that I've heard many times, and perhaps you have as well. Well, we don't have a CFO if it's a smaller company, or they don't even have an accountant in the company that you're addressing. That's fine. Many of them use a bookkeeper. They use QuickBooks. They rely that the owner or the founder is the one that's handling all of the finances, or they only update numbers monthly or less. And the takeaway from that too is that forecasting, it doesn't require that you have a full finance team on board, but it does require that someone has a reasonable visibility, and I have that highlighted, a reasonable visibility into the cash, the revenue, and the expenses. So again, as we're going through, just think about this, how it may or may not apply to your clients right now. And the other thing, because I have heard this a few times, people think oftentimes that forecasting supports reports, and it doesn't. It actually supports decisions. It's a decision-making mechanism. So we know this, clients don't generally care so much about the models, but they're caring about their hiring, their spending, cash runway, and then their risk. So if you are going to look at forecasting for your clients, and again, because we're talking kind of specifically around Q1, you want to tie that forecasting into a decision. It's layering it on top of a report or embedding it into decision making for their Q1. And talking about Q1 as well, I can't believe we're already into February, so we're a month into already Q1. But if you haven't forecasted yet with your clients, all is not lost. We still have another 2 months to go. And also, many companies will forecast even into like the early stages of Q2. It is considered generally a little bit behind schedule if you're going into Q2, but it's actually far common than we know. And so I don't want anyone to panic here and think, oh, well, by the time I talk to my client and by the time we get everything going, Q1 is going to be almost over. That's okay. We still have another 2 months to go. And even if they are going into, like I said, the early phase of Q2, that's fine. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is forecasting. If you're thinking immediately, well, this feels a little too advanced for the type of clients that I work with, Tracy. Start smaller. I always say, slow and steady wins the race, and we don't want to overwhelm them anyway. So, forecasting can mean very simply that it can be a cash in versus a cash out, a best case versus a worst case scenario. And you can do it, like I said, in a smaller chunk where maybe you're only looking at 90 days. It doesn't have to be this quarterly or twice a year investment. Generally, it is, and that's generally what you're going for. But if your company, you don't think that that would meet their needs, that's okay. There's still a huge benefit from them in doing a smaller, like I said, a cash in or an out, or doing it in a 90-day sprint as such. The takeaway that I have there, just to piggyback off of that, is if it's done consistently, it's more valuable than if you had this just one large, complex forecast run. So again, just to highlight that as we're going through today, think about this for your clients, what it means for them right now, not forecasting from last year or Q4, but what they're realistically looking at right now, what level they're even capable of, and then how Q1, the decisions of Q1 can change or might change based on what those numbers currently are telling them. So I want you to focus on that as we start. So, what is exactly financial forecasting? Even people in finance sometimes get this confused and they mix it up with budgeting, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. But very simply, financial forecasting, it's a fundamental process, and what it is it's predicting future financial outcomes. And future meaning, obviously, it's forward thinking. We're not thinking about an audit that was year prior and looking behind. So forecasting, hence the name, always looking into the future and thinking forward. And it's a very meticulous analysis, and it's based on historical data, market trends, and economic indicators. And depending upon your business, depends upon obviously how much into the weeds you would go into with them on those three different indicators, but those are the three that you would be highlighting. Any historical information, data that they have, what is the market showing, what's been trending, and then what are the economic indicators. And so you have two different strategic roles around financial forecasting: planning, the allocation, and then guidance. A strategic tool crucial for planning revenue, managing expenses, the cash flow, and whatnot. And then also that it provides a data-driven roadmap for business direction and growth. So it's not just about numbers per se. People often think, well, forecasting is only highlighting numbers. That is true. That is a very large component of it, but it also has a strategic role. And what it is not, and again, we'll get into the differences with budgeting on the next slide, but it's not guesswork. Now, obviously, we don't have a crystal ball as such, but if financial forecasting is done correctly, it actually is a pretty, it, I won't say it's fail proof, but it's can be fairly close. It's not a speculative process. It's highly analytical and it's a scientific process as such. And so, again, if done correctly, you should be able to get a very realistic outcome from it. It's also not static, meaning it moves to evolving conditions, and it's not a one-time exercise. By right, it should be ongoing, it's iterative, and demands that you have regular review. Now, you will hear people say oftentimes, well, we do forecasting, but we only do it 1 or 2 times a year. Now, my quick answer to that is, well, 1 or 2 times a year is better than none. But if you really want to get the meat and potatoes and the most benefit from forecasting, you would be doing it quarterly. In some situations, you do it even more than quarterly. You might be doing it once a month. But again, it depends on your industry. Is it a regulated industry? And forecasting is really crucial to how the business runs. Or, I'm so sorry, I have a dog at my feet that's starting up with some shenanigans here. So I apologize if I'm a little distracted here. So hopefully he will wind down here for the next 45 minutes. But I wanted to mention that again, depending upon the industry, you might want to encourage your clients to run it monthly or at the very least quarterly. So they would have a forecast, a running forecast, minimally 4 times a year. So I mentioned before how budgeting is different than forecasting. They run very similarly, but they are not. And I wanted to have a slide on this because you hear this oftentimes. Oh, well, we already did a budget for the year. We spent a lot of time and money, and we even had a consultant come in, Tracy, that ran our budget for the year. Why do we need to forecast? Budgeting, it's a plan that you set in advance, and it's only created once per year, and it's based on assumptions. So very simply, what it answers is what do we expect to spend and earn? Forecasting, on the other hand, it's more of like a living document of what's likely going to happen. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, it's updated either monthly or quarterly, typically speaking. There are some exceptions, but generally it's updated monthly. Again, the idea being that it's ongoing and that it's based on real data and trends. So what that answers, and you'll see the differences here between it and budgeting, is what is actually going to happen. So expectations are not what we believe is realistically day to day going to happen in a business. So I wanted to clarify that just right out of the gate. Why Q1 forecasting matters. We talked about this just briefly a week ago when I had run my session, that Q1 is a very optimal time for many things in a business, and forecasting is certainly that. It's the strategic foundation, as I had said before, of that window of the year that typically it all happens in Q1 and perhaps early into Q2. So it's that layering down of the financial strategy and then allocating the critical budgets that everybody works so tirelessly on in Q4 or maybe at the very early stages of Q1. Q1. So they're wanting to, most businesses anyway, are wanting to implement that in Q1. And then the fiscal year visibility, you're establishing forecasting early in Q1 or Q2. They have visibility and clarity for the entire fiscal year. Now, sometimes when I say things in my trainings and I get pushback, and that's great. I love to hear pushback because there's not always a one and done or a complete, um, there's always exceptions. But I always encourage companies, if they have not forecasted, even if it's Q2 or even the end of Q2, so we're mid-year at this point, I would rather them forecast for the rest of the year, the last 6, 8 months, than to just say, throw up their hands in the air and say, well, we missed Q1 and we missed Q2, so we're not going to do any forecasting for the year. So again, ideally, the idea is that you start early and they have the breadth and the runway of the entire year, but do not let them be discouraged if they have not done that and they don't get it started until later in the year. And then obviously refinement and resilience, Q1, everyone is ready. That it's a crucial time where they refine these models, and then it's a peak business period that is hitting in Q1. And then you have your performance benchmark here, where we're talking about that it isn't just a prediction, it's an essential baseline for optimizing performance throughout the entire year. I often hear clients, and anyone, please feel free to jump in, what you hear from your own clients around forecasting. Has it been an issue? Has it been something that you all have had to um, convince them of its viability and how important it is? I'd just be curious to hear what you all are hearing out in your organizations.
Um, Tr- Tracy, I don't hear much about forecasting with the small business clients that I have. It's just something that they don't think about. And I think, and I had a quick question for you in regards to using AI powered forecasting. Uh, what would be an appropriate, or what should we consider in an appropriate prompt to use AI powered forecasting for a small business that may not have done it ever before, just to get kind of a feeling for what forecasting looks like? Would they use their competition
They
as
can. They
okay,
can.
so
I would encourage them to do that.
mhm,
I also would encourage them to look again, because it is a forward thinking processing tool.
right.
Where would they like to be by year end or mid-year? Realistically, do they have a number in mind, or did they maybe meet their number last year? And now going into this year, they roughly have an idea, or maybe they have a very definitive number of where they would like to be, and put that number in the prompt.
Mhm.
How can we actualize that number by mid-year or by the end of the year, and then see what it comes back with. We're going to get more into not the prompting so much, but further on in the deck here, we're going to talk more about tools that they can use that can get them started with that. But it's kind of the idea is, as far as the prompting goes, it might, what's the right word? You might be able to encourage them to, I don't want to say dream, but
Mhm.
work toward that number, what it would take for them to work toward attaining that number by year end or by mid year. And so if they put it in the prompt, that might actually be a motivating, in a roundabout way, a motivating way for them to meet that
Mhm.
number by mid year, end of the year.
And are we just talking about revenue, or are we talking about revenue and
We're
profit, or just
we're gonna get
what's
into that.
okay?
We're
I'm
talking
jumping ahead.
no,
Sorry.
that's okay. No. Those are great questions, and we are going to get to those. And again, I'm just giving you all kind of a highlight
Perfect.
here of forecasting, because this can be a very complicated topic. But no, we are getting to that.
Okay, thank you.
No, thanks for the question. So how AI enhances forecasting? How can AI help in all of this? Obviously, there's going to be improved visibility. We're running, I'm going to have to skip through some of these a little bit because we're getting a little bit slow on time and I want to have time for questions. You're going to have it helps with advanced scenario modeling. We're going to talk about that in another slide. Some of you know what scenario modeling is. Very briefly, it's a what if scenario that you run that tests different assumptions and it prepares for different market conditions. And then obviously AI, as we all know, helps in early risk detection, and that's extremely important. And then it maintains human control. And this, as we all know, is a very big concern for most people today. That the AI is augmenting financial judgment, not replacing it. Finance teams still need to be retained for any of those final decisions. So if you are talking to a group, particularly a small business, as Amy mentioned, that is a concern for many of them, really for everyone, but particularly for smaller businesses that may or may not be up to speed with what exactly this is going to entail. We absolutely need to have humans in the loop when we're talking about forecasting. And a great example to use with them is that you can suggest is, well, if you have had in your companies forecasting in the past, you still had humans, even if you hired out, a consultant who was outside of the company or someone like that, or you were, like I said, you were running Excel and you were doing forecasting through that, you still had a human set of eyes that was looking at it. So sometimes that gentle reminder can help them. So there's three different parts when generally when we're talking about forecasting, and these get mixed up a lot of the time. You have your quality assurance, and then you have scenario planning, and then you also have, I'm sorry, a little distracted here. And then you also have, yes, your stress testing, my apologies, and your stress testing. The umbrella generally is your quality assurance sits up at the top, and then the other two run below. Now, sometimes in scenario planning, it's not part of quality assurance, but oftentimes it is. But the idea is that you want to start with the companies and starting them with quality assurance first. And quality assurance in layman terms is you're checking that the system works and that it's intended before the people rely on it. And so what I had mentioned up above here is that the QA must come first. And how you build that trust with quality assurance is that you're asking, there's several questions that you can ask. These I would say are the top 5 or 6, is what does accurate actually mean for them? This is something that they have to answer before you start quality assurance. And that's ensuring that the data input, it's clean, complete, and representative. What exactly, how accurate, what does that look like for them? And then what data is allowed? You're validating that data. And again, this can mean very different things for different companies. So this is where kind of the nuance and knowing your client and their business well comes into play. What error level is acceptable? Where you're tracking the accuracy metrics and then identifying the degradation over time. What error is acceptable to them? And then bias. What bias do they consider unacceptable? And then correcting the systemic errors around that or unfair patterns in those predictions. These are all things they need to be thinking about if they haven't up to date. And then what must be explainable? And that's maintaining transparent records of these model decisions and the changes for audit, because they are going to have to keep records of all of this, whether they use AI or not. So I saw this quick, I can't take credit for this definition, but I thought it was really great. So I wanted to put it in here. So for our purposes with AI systems, a simple way to think about it is that QA is the rule book and AI is the player as such, and it can help referee, but it never writes the rules. So again, this is a very iterative process in that all of these questions that we just went over need to be answered by the companies, and that they still very much have ownership over how they want that quality assurance to look like before AI is implemented. And so these are the two areas that I talked about just briefly a moment ago that you'll hear a lot in organizations: stress testing and scenario planning. In smaller businesses and even in mid-sized companies too, they may have done little to absolutely none of this. None of this. And I would love to hear from others in the group as we're going along how they've tackled this. But a stress test is just how much can the system handle? And it's where you're pushing your system beyond normal operating conditions for their breaking points, and then how the performance gets degraded. I always encourage clients, if they have not done stress testing, that they would want to do it now, because it's better to understand, it's a better way of understanding the system and their limits while they still can bow out gracefully, meaning it's a test, but it wasn't a live test in the sense that they're going to actually lose from it. So you would want to run this as a precursor for, God forbid, X, Y, or Z happens. And so that usually kind of gets them thinking that, like, oh, okay, well, even if we do this stress test and we fail it in this testing mode, it's better that we do it now than if it was a real live use case. And then as far as scenario planning goes, that is, sorry, there's a now, now there's a fire engine going off in the background. I'm in New York City, so you just never know here. But as far as scenario planning goes, that's a what if situation. What if this happened? What if that happened? And thinking about it again, I think oftentimes risk management and governance, they get criticized for thinking too far out of the box and too far out of, well, we can't plan for everything. That's true, but you actually can plan for a fair amount, and scenario planning lets you do that. Again, it's forward looking, and it explores different possible futures based on varying assumptions. So getting your teams to think about these, and when I say varying assumptions, it doesn't have to be 10 things. It doesn't even have to be 5 things. It could just be their top 2 or 3 assumptions that are fairly realistic, meaning what if they happen, because there's a realistic chance that they could. So again, I don't want to go, you don't have to go too broad with your teams. If you can, great. If you need to and it's a necessity, then you should. But you don't always have to. So starting them off small and just thinking, again, 2 or 3 can be very can be applicable as well. And then you're creating this roadmap for navigating this uncertainty for them. And that in scenario planning, you're enabling these quick responses when the market conditions shift. So you can see stress similar, but they are different. And I mentioned them. I know this is probably a review for many of you, but they oftentimes get used interchangeably. Oftentimes, even the owner of the company or C-suite doesn't even always know that there are nuanced differences between these two. And so at a very high level, I wanted to mention them today. And so some common misconceptions, and there's many, but I just highlighted 4 here for time's sake. But common misconceptions that undermine a forecast's reliability are these top 4, and that is an over-reliance on historical data. And I touched upon this earlier in the conversation when I said you will have companies say to you, well, we already did our numbers from last year. We've already budgeted. Well, what they budgeted on was historical data, so it has already occurred. And forecasting, not to sound redundant, is looking ahead. It's not looking behind. And then we have infrequent updates. This is a real problem. I talked about it earlier. If you find a company that even allows for forecasting or has done forecasting, oftentimes you'll hear them say, well, it was inaccurate, or we never really got much out of it. And then you find out that they did not do it often enough. So what I had mentioned before, you're really wanting to encourage them to do it at least quarterly, generally speaking, and oftentimes even more than that on a monthly, maybe every 6 weeks or so, because infrequent updates does not allow for a successful forecast. And then what I just mentioned before, scenario planning, if they ignore that altogether, that can absolutely affect their forecast. And then this last one, which I know we all have dealt with in some shape or form, is data fragmentation. This, I tell you, if anyone can solve this, truly solve this for companies, they should win the Nobel Peace Prize, as far as I'm concerned. Everything is fragmented today. You have it in spreadsheets. Everybody's working in silos. They're working in different systems. And oftentimes these systems are disconnected. Therein lies the problem. So not having that unified view can rob them of what it is that they're looking for in their forecast. So we have there's many different forecasts that you can run, but typically I just highlighted here the top four, five or six that I have here. And this graph is pretty long. You all are going to have the link to this deck here when we leave, so you can just kind of glance over it while I'm chatting. But I wanted to go over to answer Amy's question earlier, the top three, because these are the three that are very common. I would say generally are the most useful, and they're also the three that often get mixed up with one another. And that's revenue forecasting, your cash flow, and your expense forecasting. And if you look at revenue, and the other thing I wanted to mention too is if you can only get them to do a smaller forecast, your clients, I would have them run these three. If that's all you can get them to do is have them run these top three, fantastic. But there's obviously more forecasting that's listed here. Revenue that is what drives everything. So if their revenue is off, if it's wrong, that means everything else in the forecast, every other forecast that they run is going to be off. So I would encourage you to start with this first. And then your cash flow forecasting is, will we have enough cash and when? That's what a cash flow forecast is. And I wrote the word critical there because it often gets mixed up with revenue and with the revenue forecasting. And the cash is, when will we have enough? And then when will we have enough? And then your expense forecasting is, what will it cost us to run the business? So you can see how these are similar to some extent, but not. They actually have a lot of nuances. And I have the far right column here with the AI tools, which I'm going to get to on the next slide. These are the currently, now we all know AI is moving at warp speed right now, but these are the tools that are really very common for these types of forecasting. And we'll go into them again a little bit more in depth in the next slide. But I also have P&L listed forecasting, scenario forecasting, which we just talked about a moment ago, and then rolling forecast. But again, my takeaway for you all, and I think for most smaller clients, small to your small medium clients, I would say if you could honestly, you will hit a home run with them if you can just get them to do these top three: the revenue, cash flow, and expense forecasting. And I have here, these are the tools that were mentioned on the previous slide. The two that I personally am the most familiar with are Cube and Data Rails. I'd be curious to know from anyone here who wants to jump in what they may have used or heard of. But I gave just a quick little blurb so you can see what they're known for primarily. So if you look at Cube, that is an AI forecasting that's inside the tools they already use. It's very common. I had here that it's very easy adoption and it's AI accelerated variance explanations. Data Rails, for those of you that work with clients that are using Excel, Microsoft, it lives inside of Excel. So you will hear about this a fair amount as well for any of your clients that are using that. And that do not want to change their workflows because you come in and a lot of the clients are saying, well, we already have Microsoft, we're not going to go big. We don't need to change anything up. We have it, we like it, our staff is comfortable and knows it. So this is a good one that you could consider. And as we're going through here, I want you to notice that they do, again, they're very nuanced. So you might think all forecasting models are the same, and they're not entirely. So just notice these changes. I have them highlighted and underlined here. The Abacum it's more collaborative and it's more for real-time planning. And then Jirov is more for intuitive forecasting, and then their emphasis on scenario analysis. And what I mean on intuitive forecasting is maybe somebody that did the forecast from the year previous. They know the numbers, they know what's already trending. Um, they look at things again from more a little bit more of a historical basis, though I know I just said to you earlier, forecasting is looking forward. It's not looking backward, and that is true. But it's for that person on the team that, like I said, had used it in the past and has what we call more of an intuitive way of how they forecast. And then planful, which is your basic forecasting, and that's used for continuous planning, for basic forecasting to continuous planning cycles. So Cube and Data Rails, like I said, I've personally used those two, and they are among the currently, again, still early in the year, but they're among the most popular right now because they combine AI assisted forecasting and again with user friendly workflows. And for finance, I tacked that on here, that finance teams already understand. So it might be an easier sell to work with them on forecasting tools that the finance teams, since they're the ones that are likely going to be, this is going to fall in their domain. It possibly an easier sell to mention these two to them. So that is the end for us. I know I crammed in an enormous amount of information in 45 minutes, and I wanted to have time for questions. Um, does anyone have any questions right now or anything that they wanted to add or counter? Oh, I see Nicole's hand is raised. Yes.
Hey, Tracy, great presentation. And I just wanted, I'm not sure how to ask this or how you would want to answer it, but so looking at like those tools you provided, one of the things I've been working on, and I work with a lot of different nonprofits, chambers, economic development, DMOs. I work with SMBs too. And one of the things that I've been in the process of developing for one of my chamber clients is a bot to do forecasting. Not using that tool and any of the tools that you showed, but I'm kind of using Manus to create it. And if you know much about Manus actually, it's not an LLM, so it's a wrapper. But anyway, so I'm interested to know because you didn't mention any of the other LLMs, Claude or Chat or Manus, if if you could use those instead of the tools. So that's part of the question. And then the second piece of that is, do you think it is reasonable to be able to develop some type of automation or bot? The way I would want it to work is that it would do the analysis on a quarterly basis for this chamber.
Okay. That's a really good question. And I don't, to be very honest with you, I don't know. I mean, I think I know, but I don't know for sure. As far as using Manus, no, I did not include the other LLMs. So it's a very good catch on your part. My only concern about it, and anyone else, feel free to chime in or that can speak more to this or has heard more about this, please chime in. I would be concerned with audit if they're a company that gets audited or that is heavily regulated, that using a bot as such, that would not, again, I'm not saying this is the gospel, but that would be my concern, is that it would not hold up in an audit. So I'd have to dig around a little bit more to actually give you, or like I said, anyone else, please speak up, because I don't actually know that the answer to that. My initial guess would be, I mean, there's so many variables. I know you're in nonprofits and they work very differently. I don't work in the nonprofit space, so I couldn't definitively say. The risk manager in me would have a concern with a bot for an audit as it pertains to an audit, but I don't know for sure. So I'm sorry I can't answer that. I can dig around. Let me give me a couple days to dig around on that, and I can get back to you on that.
That would be great. Yeah, definitely I know the nonprofit world is different. These, in this case, these are all not for profits, they're generally not tax deductible organizations, but
Well, they're under a different
most
tax.
chambers
Yeah,
do.
yeah, they're under a
Most
different
chambers do
tax.
have, yeah. And they do have annual audits.
Mhm.
Most of the small businesses I work with don't. They're small enough they don't do the audits, but I do have one though that because they get government contracts, they do have to have annual audits. That's
Sure.
just part of having government DOT contracts. So okay, well, if you find out anything, I'd love to hear about it,
Well,
because
you've
I'm thinking of it.
go on.
I'm just thinking of it from the perspective on the chamber side of the forecasting, that it's just a tool. It wouldn't, like you said, it's not an exact science anyway, but
Right.
it helps them to analyze and evaluate as they're going through the year. And I mean, so much can affect
True.
like a chamber or an economic development. I mean, you're going to deal with like an economic development, you're going to deal with the tariff situation that isn't going to affect a lot of other small
Right.
businesses. Or, for chambers of commerce, they're going to be impacted by any type of state laws that get
Sure.
passed or city laws. So that, this just, like I said, it's more of that it's for a tool for them, that it's not so much an exact science, but it's a way for them to continually analyze their
Yes.
position and performance.
Right. No, and it's important. And I mean, I would rather see them use a bot, and even if they used it in an indirect way to make decisions. I mean, I'm a big believer in forecasting, so I have a hard time saying no to any kind of forecasting. But I will look into that. I'm glad you asked the question, because now you have me thinking about it. And this is why I like these training sessions, is because we all can be learning from one another and raising issues and questions that we're seeing in our respective businesses. I hadn't, to be very honest with you, I hadn't really thought about it. And
Well,
and
I
I'm
mean,
glad you raised
most
the
chambers are. Yeah, thank you, Tracy. I appreciate the opportunity to even ask it because most chambers or economic development organizations or CVBs, they don't do forecasting right now. And I think this could really help them out. They do budgets and
yes.
they might even do an annual budget and a longer term budget to go with their strategic plan, but they don't actually do forecasting.
I
So
know.
thank you. This was so helpful.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. You're very kind. No, like I said, I really would push as best you can with your clients to run forecasts. Like I said, I'm a big believer in them. I come from financial services, no surprise there, but I really know how much companies can glean from them. And again, if they can run them monthly, quarterly. I mean, listen, if a company's not running them at all, even quarterly would be helpful, but ideally you want it more than that. But I'm going to dig around on that and I will reach out to you. You and I are connected on LinkedIn. I will certainly get back to you on that. Does anyone else have any questions or anything that I mentioned that you kind of see the converse of what I spoke about or that you are not seeing? I like to learn from you all as much as you learn from me, hopefully. So anything that you're seeing that maybe contradicts what I mentioned today or
So Tracy, Anthony is got his hand up and I've unmuted him, so he's gonna share with you now.
okay,
Can you hear
great,
me now?
thanks. Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Awesome. So no, thank you, Tracy. I think this has been very insightful. I was curious, given all the extra tools that the Microsoft suite now has with Copilot, I wasn't sure where that has evolved to with any forecasting tools. But given what you just said, it probably wouldn't be compliant for a rigorous forecasting process but would it be reasonable or using these tools reasonable for a small organization to use them?
Yes. And that's why the one in particular is very popular, is because it's already in Excel. And for companies that are using Microsoft, again, I mean, I don't know what all of you are seeing out there in your client base or whatnot, but most people, a lot of people, it's either Google or Microsoft. So if they have that platform, they like it, they do not want to change it, or they're, not ideally looking to change it. That's a tool within it that's already there that they can look at. So
Right. And do you know, in terms of, I can go, is it cube.com? Do they come
yes.
with, I know data rails I've heard is a little pricey. Um, I wasn't sure in terms of pricing, if you knew anything about those.
Pricing, I could not give you an answer on.
Okay.
Sorry, I couldn't give you an answer on that. But I have seen just myself and then colleagues of mine that have said that they are seeing when they are talking with groups, if you tell them it's a Microsoft product, for many of them, oh, okay, that's fine. Like they have that relationship with Microsoft, and most of them are not, or like I said, for myself and my few of my friends that work in this industry that say that most people, if you say, oh, it's already part of Excel, that's usually enough for them to go along with it.
Mhm. Also, on the forecast types, you said that the top three on the list of forecast types you should try to do every year, at minimum. Ideally, all of them, but at minimum, do the top three. I'm curious in terms of, you also said that frequency is valuable,
Yes.
trying to do it quarterly. And so maybe doing them all, trying to encourage them to do them all once a year, but then is there a frequency of certain ones that's really important that you do quarterly or more important?
Those top three. Those
Okay.
top three. If that's the only thing that you can get them to commit to,
Mhm.
I would do those top three. That's what I had up there. P&L is important too. Again, there's so many mitigating factors that it's hard for me to give you all a one and done on all of this. When you come into an organization and you see what kind of shape they're in, listen, if they if their numbers are good, if their data is just a mess, if they maybe had a bad audit the year before and now this year going forward, they're like, listen, we can't have that happen again.
Mhm.
Um, you know, we this year we're going to be much more prudent. Then yes. I personally, I would push them to run all five or six that I had listed. But for many companies, they're just not going to do it. They're
Mhm.
not. So as consultants, we can only encourage, give them examples. And then, like I said, if it's, well, give me A or B, the A that I would say is those top three.
Nice. And one last thing for these small the owner with maybe a small shop, two employees, two, three employees, they're using QuickBooks, probably
Yeah.
you know, driving them crazy in terms of maintaining that. The extracting information from QuickBooks and those types of tools. Um, have you found that Cube and is it pretty straightforward? Is it an integration or is it a download? What does that look like in terms of the process for getting the data from these cube and or is it just does it stay natively in these
It
devices and
it stays whatever they already have there in Excel, that's where it's pulling from.
okay,
So if they already have that, or like you said, QuickBooks, that's another one that's very common, particularly with your smaller businesses. It is gonna pull from that.
perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mhm. You're welcome. Anyone else here? I think we're down to, I can't see what time we're at here, but anyone else want to throw anything else out? Or like I said, anything else that you're seeing out there to help any of us? Me? Anyone else is me too?
No, it looks like you may have covered everything,
Okay.
unless I'm speaking out of turn.
All right. Well,
So thank
every
you.
oh no, thank you. Thanks to everyone for coming on. I know that these sessions can be kind of hard on a Monday, late afternoon, and I apologize. My dog is going to be very happy now here that I'm going to be done here. So it's probably time for us for me to bid adieu to everyone. Sorry, I was a little distracted on this call today, but feel free to reach out to me if you think of anything after the session. I know sometimes we think of things a day or two later. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can look at those QR codes, obviously find me within the group, and always happy to make connections there.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you, everybody else. A pleasure to have everyone. Please stay safe, warm.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night there.